It's always a pleasure to come to Johannesburg and talk. And I managed to get a few other people from Cape Town to come here. But that's actually just to remind Cape Town that there's a part of Africa. It's not really European. Thank you, Cape Town people. You can come closer, actually. It's okay. It's the tip of the continent, maybe in the corner. So, regardless of what people may say about this conference, it's a milestone in our community. The fact that we have the very first agile software conference in Africa, on the continent, that is significant, regardless of what we say. So even if there are 5 of us here, it will still be significant. But because someone heckled me last night, I'm going to pick that person out. And for me, this goes back to 2005. This guy in the audience, I can't even find him. His name is Chris Knight. Chris, where are you? He's there. Him and his management were responsible for bringing Kent back to South Africa. And after that event, they launched the X3 program in music, which has evolved over time and is now part of the Agile Forum of the JCC, but it has a long history. So whilst we may have pioneers of the industry on the stage here and in our presence, Chris Naidu, you're a pioneer for our community, and I thank you. And now the heckling. So it's history. So you think you know everything about Agile, so now you're into politics. Next year is election year, but you know what? You don't make shower heads for lots of heads. This is not a provocative talk. This is actually a story about myself. And things that I've learned, and things that I've experienced, that I want to share with you. It might not be anything new, but it's really important for me to bring it back to an African context. And also a South African context. And that's important to me. What you take out of this is up to you, and if you discard it, I'm actually okay with that as well. So, do what you want with that. You can't talk about apartheid and democracy without having black and white photographs. So, the thing about this slide is that it's architects of apartheid and architects of democracy. Kind of like the work that we do within our organizations. Not that we are building apartheid organizations. More, you know. But do you remember some of these people? You know, I'll remind you, on the top, the corner, right-hand side, you put Good, Foster, you put Crocodile, EW, FW Duterte, Albert Patuli, a very young Nelson Mandela, Steve Biko, and I deliberately chose Chris Hani because it's 20 years since he passed away and we celebrated his life again. But significantly and tragically, his death accelerated us, forced us to bring the election day closer. That didn't happen. He didn't die. I doubt would have had an election as soon as 1994. But my story starts in 1969. In 1969 is when I entered the world, a small town called Maritzburg, into a pretty unremarkable family. There was only one difference about my family, and that is that at that point in time, in a small community in Maritzburg, both my parents were professionals. It was unheard of. And they both studied medicine outside of South Africa because they couldn't study it within South Africa. They studied in India. And I'm the youngest of 3 sons. It's an unremarkable life because it is most probably the most boring family on earth. So as we grew up, my eldest brother became a pharmacist and he married a pharmacist. And brother in between us became a doctor and he married a doctor. And there's enough doctors and drug peddlers in my family. The good drugs. But the thing is about growing up in a small town is that, it's a pretty ordinary life. Really, really ordinary. young child, 5, 6 years old, it's complete innocence. There's nothing else. I went to school that I could walk to down the road from me. That's where I went. And my brothers went there as well. And so in 1976, when we had the uprising, and every one of you who are from South Africa should be familiar with this picture of Hector Pieter. It's iconic. I didn't even know it happened. I was 7 years old. If I was aware of it, I can't remember that I was aware of it. I didn't know what it meant. But it now feels like a significant moment in our history. And the thing is that history is something that we've all shared. It's our history, regardless of what your skin color is, religion, rituals, etc. It's a shared history, and it's iconic. But by 1980, 4 years later, I protested for the very, very first time. So I was in grade 6, I was 10, 11 years old. And after assembly, a few of us, maybe about 20 or 30 of us, we hang out with the teenagers because they're the cool guys, a couple of grades ahead of you. We didn't go back to our class after assembly. You know what assembly is like. You stand in the line and they ring the bell, you walk far away. We went and stood on the ground. About 20 or 30 of us. Bad move, bad planning, because the local police station was neighbor to the school. Right? And so the headmaster called the cops in. Okay? And we saw the cops, and we were 10, 11 years old, and you think you're going to stand there and protest against the system of education that you're being subjected to. So it wasn't so much the cops that made me scared. It was when the headmaster came and said, Aslam, I'm going to tell your father. And I went back to my class. So my protest lasted 8 minutes, right? Because in a small community where your father's a doctor, you wake up on a Sunday morning and you trot out of bed, without a shirt and some underwear, and your headmaster's sitting in the lounge having tea. You don't want that kind of life. So there's a sense of authority that comes with living in that kind of society, and that authority starts with my parents, right, for whatever reasons, but also from the community in which we live. And when you grow up with that authority, and that authority instills fear in us, because we knew what the rules of our society were. We intrinsically knew not to cross over to the other side of the street. Those places were out of bounds. Those movie houses weren't for us. You knew that. It was. So you knew how to play with the rules of society. It instills a certain amount of fear as well. The next significant moment in my life was in 1986. I was in Matric, my last year of high school. I came home one day. My parents were home early. It was mid-year exams for us. And I heard from my parents that my brother had been arrested. My brother was in his 4th year of medical studies. And he was arrested because he was part of a student protest. And him and a few other people were arrested with him. And he ended up spending 6 to 8 weeks in detention without trial. In that 6 to 8 week period, my fear turned into hatred. Anger. Anger. And you don't know what to be angry about. You don't know whether to be angry about the system, about the fact that someone took your brother away. You just be angry, But you're a lot older now, and you can start thinking, trying to figure things out. When I was in university, that anger turned into hatred. In 1989, we staged a protest for the freedom of the beaches in Durban. My wife was my girlfriend then. It was the day she turned 21. She gave up the party that was planned for her to come protest on the beaches. And at 7 a.m. we stood on South Beach in Durban. And the sun was rising. And without lie, without fabrication, helicopters come off the horizon silhouetted. And you see the sand kicking up before you hear the shots fired. It's the first time you experience that kind of hatred, that people are shooting at you. You don't know whether it's live ammunition or not. And You scatter. So your anger turns into hatred, because what else can you have? It's absolute hatred. And my wife, girlfriend then, had a camera with her, and we were taking photographs of the police brutalizing us. And we were caught and pulled one side and questioned, etc., etc. I won't bore you with that. You know, and at that time, you know, in history, there used to be, you know, Kasatu used to have this slogan that the people shall govern. And as students, we had a t-shirt called the purple shall govern. Because that is what the police forces used, was a big water tanker with purple paint to mark us and then arrest us. So the purple shall govern. So that is the kind of life that you led, that formed the way you think, the way you look at the future, the way you look at the present. But by 1992, you experienced joy because Nelson Mandela was released. And with that, joy is a sense of release. Yes, release, critical release. You know, I remember picking up the phone and phoning everyone and saying, did you hear? Did you hear? You know, he's going to be released. ANC's been undammed. He's going to be out, you know. And so you get that joy, right? And that's a remarkable feeling after having that kind of hatred, and you forget about that. And then we went into a period in our history of war. You know, if we thought 1976 was a tragic year, because in 1976, from June 16 to the end of the year, 566 kids were killed. From 1992 to the first democratic elections in 1994, which is supposedly peace, about 14,000 people were killed. You know, that's like 20 a day. So your joy is short-lived, but yet we pulled through. And on that day, I actually voted. I voted a few blocks from here, a little bit more, in Yeovil, Rocky Street. We stood for 12 hours. And it was a day where I experienced unity and peace for the first time in my life. And I haven't been able to replicate that since. Because there was a camaraderie and a sense of togetherness that I've never experienced. Regardless of whether we won the World Cup or anything like that. That was the day I felt unity and peace. You know, and so 1994 marked a significant time for us. We go through freedom and one people, Rainbow Nation. And in 2006, I was working on a project here in Johannesburg. It was a serious reality check. 2006 to 1994. This is like, what, more than 10 years. And that project was the juiciest technical project you could ever have. It had all the elements to make it a really juicy geek fest. It was also a complete buy-in to be agile. And extreme programming was we lived into all of that as well. And it turned out to be the most tragic project I've ever worked in. And there's I know there's one person in the room here who can attest to that. You can call that person out. But it was a case of, you know, I had taken a team from Cape Town to Johannesburg and tried to assemble a really, really decent bunch of people. And the writing was on the wall earlier, just to see it. And one day, you know, a female white developer of mine, and I'm using that just to create context, not just to do anything else, those terms, said to me, hey Aslam, you work with these guys pretty well, hey? What do you mean? No, you can say the names well. It was then I realized that this person had never worked with a black person ever in their entire life. She was 35 years old. Never. That's remarkable in our community, in our society. That project, with all the givings of being absolutely fantastic, deteriorated at such a rapid rate into complete, it was toxic, brutally toxic. We had situations where people were calling others white supremacists. We had personal insults being thrown around. Got to a point where it became unmanageable. And together with the client, the first project, the only project where we had an industrial psychologist intervene to try to resolve this matter and to introduce calm. It was more like a peace treaty negotiation more than anything else. I'm talking literally where people are willing to actually hit each other because of differences. And I never understood why. But the differences went really, really deep. From right down at the bottom of this parking space, to political affiliation at the top. It really went on. One in the middle here, dead center, it says the authority. After the industrial psychologist came in, thanks to the guy that did that. But that was the word he introduced, and so we started going around telling everyone, hey, you're deauthorizing me.